In the cold emptiness of space, a faint signal moved through the darkness. It was weak, broken, and filled with fear. The message came from a small world far away, a planet that was home to peaceful beings who had never known war. They lived simple lives under twin suns, growing food, building small homes, and raising their children in calm and safety. But that peace had been destroyed when a massive shadow fell across their skies. The invaders came without warning, ships larger than cities moving like a dark storm through the stars. They were known across the galaxy for one thing: conquest. They took what they wanted and left behind only ashes. The small civilizations of that region had no way to defend themselves. Their ships were for travel, not for war. Their weapons were old, weak, and few in number. As the invaders rained fire from orbit, burning forests and melting oceans, the people screamed for help. Across several nearby worlds, other small races were attacked too. Their cries filled the galactic channels, mixed with panic and despair. They begged for mercy, for someone, anyone, to hear them. But most of the galaxy remained silent. The stronger empires, those with great fleets and armies, turned their faces away. They said it wasn't their problem. They said it was too far, too dangerous. And so the helpless worlds continued to burn. Days passed. The invaders showed no sign of stopping. They moved from one planet to another, destroying everything in their path. The people had no hope left. Some hid underground, praying that the enemy would overlook them. Others sent final messages into the void, knowing no one might ever hear them. But then something strange happened. One of those messages, carried by chance through old communication relays, reached a sector of space controlled by humans. It was not a powerful or well-known empire, but it was a civilization that had learned to survive through unity, courage, and the will to fight for what was right. The signal was picked up by a deep space listening post orbiting Titan, one of Saturn's moons. The operator on duty was a young man named Rayon. He was used to hearing static, background noise, or coded transmissions from nearby colonies. But this signal was different. It was weak, emotional, and filled with a voice that sounded like it was crying. Rayon replayed it again and again. He could hear the desperation clearly. The words were not in human language, but the tone said everything. Someone out there was begging for help. He sent the recording up the chain of command, unsure what would happen next. Normally, such things were ignored. Humanity had its own problems: trade routes to manage, colonies to support, and political disputes with neighboring species. But this message didn't fade. It reached the right people, and soon it landed on the desk of Admiral Mira Holt, commander of the United Terran Fleet. She listened in silence as the message played in the command hall. Around her, officers looked uneasy. Everyone understood what it meant. Somewhere out there, whole civilizations were dying, and no one was doing anything about it. For a long time, Admiral Holt said nothing. She simply looked out the window at the stars. Then she turned to her officers and asked a simple question: if it were us, would anyone come? The room fell silent. Everyone knew the answer. Humanity had not always been welcome among the stars. They were known for being bold, for expanding too fast, for fighting when others would negotiate. Many alien empires distrusted them, but humanity had something others didn't: a stubborn heart. They remembered their own history, the wars they had survived, the disasters they had overcome. And they knew what it felt like to be helpless. News of the signal spread quickly among the fleet's officers and soldiers. Many felt anger. Some felt sorrow. But all agreed on one thing: they could not ignore the call. Across the colonies, volunteers began to sign up. Mechanics left their families. Pilots returned from leave early. Ship crews prepared for long journeys. In just a few days, the fleet bays of Earth, Mars, and the outer colonies came alive with activity. Massive ships that had been resting in orbit lit up again, their engines glowing blue. Cargo ships were converted into rescue vessels. Medical units were loaded with supplies. On every deck, people worked tirelessly, not because they were ordered to, but because they wanted to help. Meanwhile, in the small alien systems under attack, the situation grew worse. Cities fell one by one. The invaders, a brutal species that believed only in domination, laughed at the helpless resistance. They believed no one would dare stand against them. After all, who would risk their own lives for strangers? They didn't know that a storm was already forming far away, a fleet of humans preparing to cross the stars. Back on Earth, families gathered to watch the news. When they heard what was happening, something inside them changed. Old men and women who remembered Earth's hardest wars nodded with pride. Children watched the giant ships rising into the sky and felt awe. Even though the mission was dangerous and many feared what would happen, hope spread like fire. Humanity for once was united not for war, not for conquest, but for compassion. They were answering a cry that others had ignored. As the final ships prepared to depart, Admiral Holt stood before her fleet. She spoke simply without fancy words. "We don't know these worlds. We've never seen their faces. But they are alive, and that is reason enough. No one deserves to die unheard. No one deserves to face darkness alone. We go not as conquerors, but as guardians." Her words were broadcast throughout every ship. The crews cheered, their hearts full of purpose. Some would never return home, but none of them cared. They knew they were doing something that mattered. The fleet launched at dawn, rising above Earth's blue oceans and passing through the atmosphere in silence. Billions watched as the ships disappeared into the stars, leaving behind trails of light. The moment was historic. Across human space, people stood still, realizing that their species had taken a step toward something greater. They were no longer just another race among many. They were becoming protectors, defenders of life itself. As the ships jumped into faster-than-light travel, the distress signals continued to pulse faintly across the galaxy. But now they were being answered. In the command room of the lead ship, Admiral Holt watched the stars stretch and blur. She didn't know what awaited them on the other side, but she felt calm. She thought of the message that had started it all, a small trembling voice crying out into the void. And she smiled softly. Somewhere, someone would soon know that they were not forgotten. Far away on a burning world, an alien child looked up at the night sky through the smoke. The stars were fading, the air was thick with ash, but for a brief moment, the child saw something bright flash across the sky. It was distant, small, but it moved with purpose. To the child, it looked like a falling star. They whispered a wish, the way their ancestors once did in peaceful times. They didn't know it yet, but their wish had already been heard. Help was coming. Humanity was coming. And so, in the quiet before the great battle, a new story began. Not of power, but of compassion. The signal that had traveled so far through cold space had reached the right hearts. The helpless were no longer alone. The galaxy would soon witness something it had never seen before. The day humanity's fleet rose not for itself, but for others. Inside the great command hall of the United Terran Fleet, the air was heavy. The distress signal from the helpless alien worlds kept playing on the main screen. It was full of static, broken words, and cries for help. The faces of the officers around the room were tense. Everyone knew what that message meant, but no one wanted to be the first to speak. Humanity had never interfered in wars that didn't involve them. They were still rebuilding from their own battles, still trying to find peace after centuries of struggle. But this time something felt different. The message wasn't just a signal. It was a cry that reached the human heart. Admiral Mira Holt stood at the center of the room. Her eyes were fixed on the holographic map that showed the location of the attacked systems. They were far beyond human borders, in a quiet region where smaller species lived peacefully. Around her, the admirals and commanders argued. Some said it was too dangerous. Others said humanity should stay out of it. "We can't risk our fleet for strangers," one officer said. "We don't even know them." Another added, "Our colonies need protection. We have to think about our own people first." But there were also voices that rose in defense of the helpless. "If we do nothing," a young commander said, "then we are no better than those who let Earth burn centuries ago." The room fell silent at those words. Everyone knew humanity's history, the wars, the pain, the times when no one came to help. They had survived because they refused to give up on each other. Could they now ignore others facing the same fate? Admiral Holt finally spoke. Her voice was calm but filled with power. "If we turn away now," she said, "then we forget who we are. Humanity was once weak too. Someone must stand for those who cannot. Let it be us." No one dared to argue after that. The decision was made. Humanity would answer the call. Messages were sent across every colony and fleet base. The order was clear: prepare the ships. Within hours, the sound of engines roared across the shipyards of Earth, Mars, and the outer worlds. Workers who had been asleep were called back to their posts. Massive carriers lit up the night skies, their lights glowing like stars. Soldiers ran through corridors loading supplies and weapons. Engineers worked non-stop, checking engines and shields. Pilots suited up, their hearts beating fast with a mix of fear and pride. Across human space, everyone knew what was happening. Humanity was going to war, but not for power, not for land, and not for revenge. They were going to fight for life itself. In the training halls, young soldiers watched news feeds showing the burning alien worlds. They saw cities destroyed, children crying, and skies filled with smoke. Some clenched their fists, others wiped their eyes. None of them had ever met those alien species, but they all felt the same pain. One soldier said softly, "If no one else will save them, we will." His words spread through the ranks, repeated over and over until it became a kind of promise. They were ready to fight for those who had no one. Meanwhile, on Earth, people gathered around screens, watching the fleets prepare. Families of the soldiers stood outside the launch stations, waving and crying. Mothers hugged their sons and daughters tightly. Children looked up at the giant ships in awe. There was fear, yes, but also pride. Humanity was doing something noble, something right. Even the media, known for their criticism, spoke with respect. "Today," one reporter said, "humanity is proving that compassion still lives among the stars." Admiral Holt moved from ship to ship, checking on her crews. Everywhere she went, she saw determination. Mechanics covered in grease saluted her proudly. Pilots promised not to fail. Medics prepared for casualties but smiled with courage. On one of the smaller rescue ships, she met a young doctor named Elias. He looked nervous but firm. "Ma'am," he said, "I've never been in a war zone before." She placed a hand on his shoulder and said, "Then you're exactly who we need. This mission isn't just about fighting, it's about saving lives." Elias nodded, and something inside him changed. That simple sentence gave him strength. Back at Fleet Command, hundreds of ships stood ready. The great carriers Vigilant Dawn and Endeavor's Light floated side by side, their hulls shining under the light of distant stars. Smaller escort ships moved around them like loyal guards. The fleet was not just powerful, it was united. From every corner of human space, people had volunteered. Some came from mining colonies, others from distant research outposts. Humanity was acting as one species, one heart. Before departure, Admiral Holt gathered her officers for one final briefing. A large holographic map showed the path they would take through hyperspace to reach the attacked systems. The journey would take several days, and there was no guarantee of success. "We are not the strongest," she told them. "But strength is not what defines us. It is courage and compassion that make humanity what it is. We fight today not because we must, but because we choose to." Her words echoed through the command center. Even the most hardened veterans felt a spark of pride. The message was clear. They were going to fight not out of duty, but out of love for life. When the order came to launch, the entire planet held its breath. One by one, the great ships began to rise. The ground shook as their engines roared. Flames and light surrounded them as they ascended through the clouds. Children pointed from rooftops, shouting in excitement. Old soldiers saluted the sky, remembering their own battles. In that moment, humanity felt united like never before. The fleet broke through the atmosphere and entered the silent void of space, forming a shining line that stretched toward the stars. As they traveled, the fleet received more distress messages. The cries grew weaker each day, and that made the humans push harder. Sleep was forgotten. Maintenance crews worked day and night. Pilots trained in simulation pods to be ready for anything. On board the flagship Vigilant Dawn, Admiral Holt stood before the large viewing window, watching the streaks of light as the ship moved through hyperspace. She remembered her earlier days in the Navy, when humans still feared the unknown. Now they were becoming the hope of the unknown. She smiled faintly and whispered, "Hold on. We're coming." Far away in the alien systems, the invaders continued their attacks. They did not yet know that a human fleet was approaching. They believed no one would dare interfere. The helpless civilizations had lost almost all hope. Some hid in caves, others buried their dead quietly. But among them, small groups kept their transmitters on, sending out the same message again and again, even when they thought no one was listening. "Please," they said, "save us." And across the stars, humanity was already on its way. As the fleet neared the outer edge of the attacked region, the tension grew. The soldiers checked their weapons. Engineers secured every system. Medics prepared the infirmaries. Everyone knew that once they arrived, there would be no turning back. The fleet entered silent formation, engines humming softly. They were ready for battle. But more than that, they were ready to make history. Admiral Holt sent one final message to all ships. "Remember why we're here. We fight for the ones who cannot. We stand between them and the darkness. Humanity has been called many things: reckless, dangerous, unpredictable. Let today show the galaxy who we really are. Her voice carried through every speaker, reaching the ears of thousands of men and women. The fleet roared in response, a sound of unity and purpose. At that moment, the stars ahead began to flicker. Long-range scanners picked up signs of battle, fires, wreckage, and enemy ships moving like vultures over dying worlds. The time had come. Humanity had answered the call. They had crossed light years not for glory but for compassion. The fleet moved forward in perfect formation, their lights shining bright against the endless dark. For the helpless worlds below, salvation was finally on its way. The human fleet came out of hyperspace like a storm breaking through the night. One moment the stars were silent, and the next hundreds of massive ships appeared, their hulls shining in the darkness. For a second there was calm, just the deep hum of engines and the faint glow of distant suns. Then the sight before them filled every screen and heart with shock. Below them the helpless worlds were burning. Whole continents glowed red. Cities were crumbling, and the black ships of the invaders hung in the sky like vultures feeding on death. The humans had arrived just in time, but only barely. Admiral Mira Holt stood at the front of the command deck of her flagship, Vigilant Dawn. Her eyes were locked on the burning planet below. "Open all channels," she ordered. The comm officers nodded, and her voice echoed across the entire fleet. "This is Admiral Holt of the United Terran Fleet. We stand between life and death today. Remember what we fight for. No retreat, no surrender." Her words filled every ship, every heart. The soldiers knew this was it, the moment they had trained for, the reason they had come across the stars. The enemy fleet was vast, dark, and organized. Their ships were sharp and deadly, moving like predators. They had already destroyed 3 planets in this system, and now they were finishing the 4th. When the human fleet appeared, the invaders paused for a moment, confused. Then they began to laugh through their communications. Their commander sent a message mocking the humans. "You dare stand against us? You are insects in our path." Admiral Holt listened calmly and replied, "Then you've never faced humanity before." With that, she gave the order. "All ships engage." The sky exploded into fire. The first human volleys hit the invader fleet like thunder. Beams of light, missiles, and plasma cannons streaked across space, turning the void into a field of burning stars. The enemy fired back immediately, their own weapons cutting through the dark like red lightning. The two forces clashed with unimaginable power, each side fighting for domination. Human pilots dove through enemy lines, weaving between explosions, locking on targets with precision. Some ships were destroyed instantly, torn apart by enemy fire, but the rest kept going undeterred. In the middle of the chaos, the smaller rescue ships began their mission. While the warships fought above, the medics and transport vessels descended through the smoke-filled skies to rescue survivors. On board one of those ships, Dr. Elias, the young doctor Admiral Holt had spoken to, worked without rest. His hands trembled as he treated the wounded, alien and human alike. The cries and screams filled the air, but he refused to stop. "Keep them alive," he shouted to his team. "As long as we breathe, we don't give up." His ship was hit once, twice, but it kept flying. Courage wasn't about being fearless, it was about pushing forward even when you were terrified. Meanwhile, in orbit, the Endeavor's light, one of humanity's largest carriers, took heavy fire. Its shields flickered and alarms echoed through its corridors. Captain Alina Reyes stood on the bridge shouting orders. "Divert power to the forward guns. Focus fire on the flagship." Her crew obeyed without hesitation. Together, they unleashed a massive burst of energy that cut straight through the enemy's command vessel. The explosion was so bright that even ships miles away saw it. Cheers erupted across the human fleet. For the first time, the invaders realized this battle was not going to be easy, but victory never came without pain. Dozens of human ships were damaged, some destroyed completely. The cruiser Falcon's Cry took a direct hit, its engines failing. Inside, Commander Rayan, yes, the same man who had first detected the distress signal back on Titan, struggled to keep his ship alive. "We're not done yet," he shouted as sparks flew across the control panels. His crew fought desperately to stabilize power, and at the last moment they managed to fire one final missile that destroyed the enemy vessel, threatening the rescue ships. A moment later, Falcon's Cry exploded, lost to the stars. Every soldier in the fleet felt that loss deeply. Admiral Holt clenched her fists as reports came in. Ships lost, people gone. But she also saw the invader fleet beginning to fall apart. Humanity's determination was breaking their enemies' confidence. The humans didn't fight like other species, they fought with fire, emotion, and unity. They protected each other. When one ship went down, another rushed forward to cover the gap. When an enemy tried to target rescue vessels, human destroyers threw themselves in the line of fire. The invaders didn't understand this kind of loyalty. They were creatures of conquest, not compassion. The battle raged for hours. Space itself seemed to shake from the violence. Planets below trembled as debris rained from the sky. The helpless civilians hiding underground could hear the thunder above and prayed that whoever had come to save them would win. They didn't know the names of their rescuers. They didn't know the faces behind the ships. But they felt hope for the first time in days. Inside the vigilant dawn, Admiral Holt received word that the enemy was retreating in one section of the battlefield. "Don't let them regroup," she ordered. "Press forward." Her fleet surged like a wave. Fighters broke through enemy formations. Bombers struck their engines, and artillery ships delivered powerful finishing blows. One by one, the dark enemy ships exploded, turning into bright clouds of light. Every explosion was a victory, but every loss hurt. In one dramatic moment, the invaders attempted to launch a massive counterattack. Their remaining ships formed a tight formation around their new flagship, charging a weapon strong enough to destroy an entire planet. Alarms screamed across the human fleet as sensors detected the growing energy. Admiral Holt looked at the readings and knew what had to be done. "All ships concentrate fire on that weapon. Every gun, every missile now." The fleet responded instantly. Streams of blue and white light filled the void as hundreds of human weapons fired in perfect synchronization. The invaders' superweapon glowed brighter seconds from firing. And then the combined human barrage struck. A blinding flash covered the sky, followed by a massive explosion that shook every ship. When the light faded, the enemy flagship was gone. Nothing remained but fragments drifting in the void. A wave of cheers erupted across the comm channels. They had done it, but there was no time to celebrate. Many enemy ships still remained, fighting desperately to escape. Human fighters chased them down, ensuring they could never return. The once invincible invader fleet was now broken, scattered, and burning. Humanity had turned the tide completely. The helpless worlds below were safe for now. As the final enemy vessel exploded, silence returned to the battlefield. The wreckage floated silently among the stars. Fires still burned on some human ships, and many were damaged beyond repair. Admiral Holt stood on the bridge looking at the scene. "Status report," she asked quietly. The voice of her officer came through, heavy with emotion. "We've lost 34 ships, Admiral. Thousands dead. But the enemy, they're gone." For a long time she said nothing. Then she nodded slowly. "Transmit to all ships. Mission success. The worlds are safe." In that moment, every surviving crew member paused. Some cried, some laughed, some simply sat in silence. They had done the impossible. Against all odds, humanity had faced a stronger enemy and won, not just through weapons, but through courage. Down on the surface of the saved planet, the survivors emerged from their shelters. The smoke cleared, and for the first time in weeks, the sun shone again. They looked up and saw the human ships in the sky, shining like silver guardians. Many fell to their knees, overwhelmed. They had been saved by strangers who owed them nothing. In orbit, Admiral Holt watched those same images on her screen. Her eyes softened. "Send down aid ship," she said. "Let them know they're not alone anymore." Rescue teams descended quickly, bringing food, medicine, and hope. Wherever they landed, the rescued people reached out their hands in gratitude. They could not speak the same language, but they understood everything that needed to be said. As the day ended, the human fleet drifted quietly among the stars. The fires of battle were fading, replaced by the gentle glow of victory. Ships that could no longer move were towed by others. Bodies of the fallen were honored with silence. In every heart, pride and sorrow mixed together. They had saved the helpless worlds, but at a great cost. The invaders were gone, defeated for the first time in their long history. They would remember this day, the day they learned that humanity was not just another young race among the stars. They were protectors, warriors with compassion, willing to fight not for conquest but for life. And as the human fleet turned its ships toward home, the galaxy itself seemed to whisper a truth that would never be forgotten. Humanity had arrived, and they had changed the meaning of courage forever. When the last echo of battle faded into silence, space was left scarred and quiet. The stars that once shone peacefully now looked down on broken ships and drifting debris. Fires burned on the edges of shattered hulls, and pieces of metal floated slowly, like ghosts of the fight that had ended. The human fleet had won, but the price of that victory was written in every flame and every silent piece of wreckage that drifted through the void. Humanity had saved the helpless worlds, but they had also left a part of themselves among those stars. Admiral Mira Holt stood on the bridge of her flagship, Vigilant Dawn. Around her, the command deck was dim. The air smelled of smoke and ozone, a reminder that even their great ship had taken damage. Technicians moved quickly, putting out fires, repairing systems, and tending to the wounded. Every face she saw was tired but alive. When she looked through the wide window at the battlefield outside, she felt both pride and grief. The enemy was gone, retreating into the depths of space, but the cost had been terrible. Reports came in slowly from across the fleet. Some ships had lost their engines completely. Others were little more than floating metal shells. Thousands of brave men and women would never return home. Their names were being recorded one by one in the ship's central archive. Admiral Holt closed her eyes for a moment, listening to the faint beeps of damaged consoles and the whispering voices of her crew. "We did it," her communications officer said softly. "The planets are safe." She nodded, but her voice came out quiet and heavy. "Yes, they are. But look at what it cost us." Outside, medical ships moved carefully between the wrecks, picking up survivors from escape pods. Some of the pods carried barely conscious pilots. Others held only silence. On board the rescue vessels, medics worked without rest. Dr. Elias, his uniform stained with blood, moved from one stretcher to another. He had treated humans, aliens, even a few of the enemy soldiers who had survived. There was no hatred left in him, only exhaustion. "Hold on," he kept saying, though many could no longer hear him. For every life he saved, another slipped away. But he refused to stop. His hands shook, his body ached. Yet he worked through the night because he knew those who fought had done so for the same reason. To save life, not take it. Across the surface of the rescued world, silence had returned too. The people who had once hidden underground were slowly coming out. Their skies were still dark with smoke, but the enemy ships were gone. When they looked up, they saw the human fleet above them, orbiting quietly like silver guardians. For the first time in their history, they felt something they had never known before. Hope born from sacrifice. Families reunited, crying and holding each other tightly. Whole cities gathered to look at the bright trails in the sky where human ships moved. They didn't understand who these humans were or why they had come, but they knew this. Strangers from another star had saved them. Admiral Holt ordered half of the fleet to stay and help rebuild while the rest prepared to return home. Repair crews worked side by side with alien engineers, fixing energy grids, cleaning the remains of battle, and helping to bury the dead. Humanity's soldiers shared food, medicine, and power supplies with the people below. In return, the aliens painted symbols of gratitude on their walls, drawings of human ships and blue lights that represented their saviors. Even though they didn't share a language, they shared emotion, and that was enough. But for the human fleet, celebration did not come easily. Every ship had lost someone. The communications channels, once filled with the noise of battle, were now full of quiet messages, letters to families, final reports, and memorial readings. On the Endeavor's light, Captain Alina Reyes stood in front of her crew. Behind her, the names of the fallen scrolled across a screen. She read them slowly, one by one. No one moved. No one spoke. Some had tears in their eyes. When the list finally ended, she said, "They gave everything so others could live. That is the greatest kind of victory there is." In the days that followed, the humans helped establish safety for the rescued civilizations. They built small hospitals, repaired communication systems, and distributed supplies. Wherever they went, the aliens watched them with admiration and disbelief. They had never seen a species fight with such fury and kindness at the same time. Humanity had not asked for money, resources, or territory. They asked for nothing at all. They simply said, "You are safe now," and continued working. To the rescued races, this made humanity something more than soldiers. They were protectors. When the first repaired ships began to leave orbit, crowds gathered below, waving at the sky. The human soldiers didn't see them, but they felt the connection through their screens and radios. Dr. Elias, standing near the window of a medical ship, watched the alien cities light up one by one as night fell. "They're saying thank you," one of his nurses whispered. He smiled weakly and replied, "No, they're saying goodbye." Before the fleet departed completely, Admiral Holt transmitted one final message to the rescued planets. Her image appeared on their communication screens, her voice steady but warm. "We are glad you survived," she said. "We came because life is precious. Remember that you are not alone in this galaxy. Humanity will always stand with those who cannot stand alone." When her message ended, the people on the planets bowed their heads in silence. They didn't know the meaning of her words exactly, but they understood her heart. As the human ships prepared for the long journey home, the crews performed a final ceremony. It was tradition in the fleet to honor the fallen with a moment of light. Every ship dimmed its interior lamps, and then, on Admiral Holt's command, thousands of external lights were turned on at once. The dark space filled with gentle white glows, each light representing a life lost in the battle. From the planets below, it looked like the stars themselves had gathered closer, shining brighter for the dead. The people watching began to weep, not from sadness but from awe. In that silent display, they saw the soul of humanity. When the ceremony ended, the fleet began its slow journey home. Some ships limped forward, damaged but still moving. Others carried heavy loads of wounded soldiers. Inside every cabin and corridor, people spoke softly about their experiences. They remembered the faces of those they had lost, the moments of fear, the courage that had pushed them through. For many, it didn't feel like a victory, it felt like a lesson. War was never glorious. It was always painful. But this time it had meaning. They had fought for something pure. As days passed, the fleet finally reached the edge of human space. Messages were sent ahead, and when they arrived, the entire solar system was waiting. Earth's skies lit up as the first ships entered orbit. Crowds filled the streets, holding signs, waving flags, and crying. When the damaged ships descended, rescue teams and families ran forward to meet them. The air was filled with cheers and tears. Reporters captured every moment, but the soldiers looked humble, even shy. They didn't see themselves as heroes. They saw themselves as people who had done what needed to be done. At a great ceremony held on Earth weeks later, a massive memorial was unveiled in the capital city. It was simple, just a tall pillar made of black stone with thousands of names carved into its surface. At the top, one line was written in silver letters. They didn't fight for power. They fought for life. People from every colony came to lay flowers, light candles, and whisper prayers. Families touched the names of their loved ones and felt pride mixed with pain. Children stood silently, learning that bravery was not about destroying enemies, but about protecting those who needed help. Admiral Holt attended the ceremony in her full uniform, though she looked older now, tired from the weight of what she had seen. When it was her turn to speak, she didn't talk about victory or strategy. She simply said, "We went to save others, and in doing so, we saved a part of ourselves. Humanity has many flaws, but we proved that our hearts still know compassion. That is what makes us strong." Her words echoed through the crowd, and for a moment everyone stood still, united by pride and grief. Far away, in the star systems that had been saved, the rescued civilizations built their own monuments. They carved images of human ships and placed them in their cities as symbols of hope. Children learned about the day the humans came, the day the light returned to their skies. They began to teach their history not as a story of loss, but as one of survival and kindness. Whenever a new ship entered their system, they would look to the stars and whisper a single word they had learned from their saviors. "Thank you." As time passed, the memory of that battle spread across the galaxy. Many powerful races who had once ignored the cries for help began to question themselves. They looked at humanity differently now, not as reckless explorers or dangerous newcomers, but as protectors who had earned respect through sacrifice. The name Terran no longer inspired fear. It inspired hope. And even though the fallen could never return, their legacy lived on in every heart that remembered what they had done. In the quiet nights that followed, Admiral Holt often looked at the stars from her quarters. Sometimes she thought she saw the faces of those they had lost reflected in the starlight. She whispered softly to herself, "You did well. You made the galaxy a little kinder." Then she would close her eyes and rest, knowing that even in the darkness of space, the light of humanity still burned bright, because of them. Years passed since the day humanity's fleet saved the helpless worlds. The galaxy had changed in ways no one could have imagined. What was once a cluster of frightened planets now stood strong and united. The people who had once looked at the stars with fear now looked at them with hope. The story of humanity's courage had spread from one system to another, told and retold by travelers, traders, and wanderers. Children across different worlds grew up hearing about the day the humans came. The day light returned to the dark. On Earth, the memories of that war still lived deeply in every heart. The Black Stone Memorial in the capital city had become a place of pilgrimage. Every year, thousands of people gathered around it, laying flowers and lighting candles. Some brought pictures of loved ones who never came home. Others came just to stand quietly and remember. Even strangers from the rescued planets would visit, leaving small tokens, crystals, symbols, or little carvings from their worlds. It had become a sacred place not just for humans but for the entire galaxy. Admiral Mira Holt, now retired, often visited that memorial herself. Her hair had turned gray, her steps had slowed, but her eyes still carried the same calm strength. When she stood before the stone, she always ran her fingers over the names of her crew, the ones who had fought beside her and never returned. Every name had a story. Every story had a heartbeat. She would whisper their names softly, one by one, as if speaking to old friends. She no longer wore her uniform, only a simple coat with a small emblem on the sleeve, a symbol of the fleet that once changed the stars. She lived now by the sea, far from the noise of cities and the busy life of command. Her house was small, peaceful, and filled with memories. The walls held pictures of her old crew, the ships they had flown, and the planets they had saved. Sometimes she would wake up at night and step outside to watch the sky. The stars shimmered above the dark waves, and every time she saw them, she felt a strange comfort. It was as if the souls of her fallen comrades were watching back, shining silently from above. But Admiral Holt wasn't forgotten. The United Galactic Council, the alliance formed after the Great Battle, often sent envoys to visit her. They still called her Admiral, even though she always told them not to. To the galaxy, she was more than a soldier. She was a symbol. Many planets had rebuilt their societies based on her ideals: cooperation, courage, and compassion. Her words, "Humanity will always stand with those who cannot stand alone," had become the motto of the Council. She never wanted fame, but her legacy had become something larger than herself. Meanwhile, humanity's fleet had grown stronger, but also wiser. They no longer built ships only for war. They built vessels for peace, exploration, and rescue. Many of the officers who had fought in that final battle now led missions of relief across the stars. Captain Alina Reyes, who had once read the names of her fallen crew, now commanded a ship called Horizon's Mercy. It carried food, medicine, and engineers to worlds struck by disaster. Wherever she went, people welcomed her with open arms. The humans had become the protectors of peace, known not for conquest but for compassion. Dr. Elias, the medic who had saved so many lives during the war, had also found his purpose. He helped establish the Galactic Health Initiative, a project that united doctors from dozens of species. Together, they built hospitals on remote planets and shared medical knowledge that saved millions. For him, healing had always been the truest victory. In one of his speeches, he said, "We once fought to stop death. Now we fight to keep life alive." His words were remembered as much as Admiral Holt's. Back on the worlds humanity had saved, life had flourished. The people rebuilt their cities, restored their lands, and began to explore space themselves. They named new schools, parks, and starships after human heroes: Vigilant Dawn Academy, Reyes Square, Elias Memorial Hospital. Every year during the same week the humans had arrived to save them, they celebrated a festival of lights. The skies of their cities would glow with lanterns, and children would release small orbs into the air, symbolizing the lights of the human fleet. It wasn't just a celebration, it was a promise that they would never forget. But even peace carries challenges. Decades after the Great Battle, new threats began to rise. Pirates, rogue fleets, and dark empires that sought to control the weak once again. The galaxy was vast and peace was fragile. Yet this time things were different. Humanity was no longer alone. The alliance of rescued worlds stood with them. Where one planet was attacked, others sent aid. Where one fleet faltered, another came to its defense. The unity born from sacrifice had become the galaxy's greatest shield. One day, the Council sent word to Admiral Holt. They wanted her to attend a grand ceremony on a distant world, the same one humanity had once saved from destruction. She hesitated at first. She hadn't traveled in years, but something inside her told her to go. When she arrived, the people greeted her like a queen, though she had never worn a crown. The streets were decorated with banners showing the old fleet insignia, and children wore uniforms made to look like those of her crew. It was overwhelming for her, but also beautiful. The ceremony took place in a vast open square, surrounded by thousands of beings from every race. At the center stood a new monument, a towering sculpture made of silver and crystal. It showed a human hand reaching down to lift another hand, alien in shape but full of life. At the base of the statue, words were carved in dozens of languages. They gave us light when we were lost. As Admiral Holt looked up at the monument, she felt tears in her eyes. For years she had carried the weight of what they lost. Now she saw what they had gained. The crowd began to chant softly, a single word that echoed through the air. Humanity. Humanity. She raised her hand to quiet them, then spoke. Her voice was older but strong as ever. You call us heroes, she said, but we were just people, afraid, unsure, and tired. What made us strong wasn't our weapons or our ships. It was our hearts. We believed life was worth saving no matter the cost. And you proved we were right. Look around you. This unity, this peace, it's the victory that matters. When she finished, the crowd erupted into applause. The sound rose into the air and carried across the city. For the first time in many years, Admiral Holt smiled without sadness. She realized then that the battle they had fought long ago wasn't just about saving planets. It was about changing the future. And they had done it. The light that humanity had brought to the galaxy still burned brightly, passed from one generation to the next. That night, she sat beneath the stars with a group of young cadets from different species. They asked her to tell them stories from the war. She told them about courage, about fear, and about friendship that went beyond race or world. Remember this, she told them softly. When the dark comes again, and it always does, stand together. That's how you win, not with fire, but with unity. The cadets nodded, their faces full of wonder. For them, she was living history. For her, they were the promise of tomorrow. When she finally returned home, she was tired but content. She knew her time was near. One evening, she sat by her window watching the sun dip below the ocean. The waves glowed gold under the fading light. She looked up at the stars, the same stars she had once fought beneath, and whispered, "We did good." Those were her last words. That night she passed away peacefully in her sleep, with the sound of the sea beside her and the light of the stars above. The news spread quickly across the galaxy. Every planet lowered its flags. Ships dimmed their lights for 1 full hour in her honor. The Council declared a day of remembrance, not of war, but of unity. Her ashes were carried aboard a ship named Eternal Horizon, and from orbit above Earth, they were released into space. Her particles joined the stars she had loved so much. Some said that if you looked closely at the night sky, you could see a new light shining among them, a quiet, steady glow that never faded. Generations later, children on many worlds still learned about Admiral Holt and the day humanity's fleet saved the helpless worlds. To them, it wasn't just history, it was inspiration. They grew up believing that kindness could change galaxies, that courage could unite species, and that even in the darkest times, one act of compassion could light 1,000 stars. And so humanity's legacy lived on, not through war or power, but through hope. As the centuries rolled by, explorers from new civilizations would sometimes find the old battlefields, now calm and covered in stardust. Among the silent wrecks, they would find human emblems still floating, preserved by time. They would take them home and hang them in their halls as reminders of the ones who came before. The words on those emblems were simple but eternal, for those who cannot stand alone. And somewhere, deep in the endless sea of stars, the light of humanity still shone, gentle, enduring, and eternal.